So we are only 2 weeks away from our preparation for Christmas, known as Advent. And in Advent, there are readings that are about kind of apocalyptic. And so today's readings are a kind of foretaste of the apocalyptic readings that are very much part of the Advent season, where we are looking forward with expectancy to a future. And there's a lot of misinformation about what apocalypse really is about, and it's really colored by movies. We've had a whole spate of Apocalypse Now and movies that have really kind of tainted the real meaning of what an apocalypse is. And the Greek word apocalypsis, even though it's used in a popular sense to describe disaster and cataclysm, the real meaning, the original meaning, is about revelation. It's about pulling back the veil on something that you hadn't seen before. And we know that a particular form of apocalyptic writings was developed by the Jews. And one of the first people to do this is Isaiah, the reader, the first lesson that we had today. And often apocalyptic literature falls into one of three categories. It's either about, from the present, reviewing and rewriting the past in a different way. One might think, for example, of a play that might begin on the observation tower of the World Trade Center in the year 2000. So the buildings are already gone, the cataclysm has happened, but the play begins, and then it is kind of rewriting the story from that position. So that is one form of apocalyptic writing. Another is to look at the situation today. And sometimes it's about there's some disasters or there's some natural disaster going on. And it's all about that the moment today is terrible, and so we're looking to the future when things get better. And then the third form of apocalyptic writing is concerned completely with the future, moving into a place of perfection when all of the things that we hate and we don't like and we have trouble with, all of that is healed and restored. And all three of those apocalyptic traditions are in Isaiah, the book of Isaiah. And today's section, he focuses on the main role of Jerusalem in God's plan for the world. And even though this was written 8 centuries before Jesus, it's a hugely important piece of writing. And certainly Jesus is inspired by Isaiah, and Jesus is also colored in his thinking about what it means to be the Messiah from texts from this book. While in exile at the time of Isaiah, the Jews also came in contact with other religious traditions, particularly, Persian idea. And I like to think about this as kind of early science fiction, when the sons of darkness, the children of darkness, and the children of light are in conflict. And so they wove these ideas also into their theology. And certainly by the time of the life of Jesus, the Qumran community, for example, lots of writings, you have this kind of dualism of light over darkness that is part of the apocalyptic story. And some rabbis tried to squelch this writing as they saw it encouraging revolt among the people. And at the time of Jesus, there was no love of Rome, but they knew that the people would be overrun when revolt came. So there was ambivalence to these apocalyptic writings. And because the present is unbearably difficult, apocalyptic writings were preoccupied with the future and how things might get better. In the letter to the Thessalonians, David's point about the hardworking Thessalonians. Often this text has been used to, kick people off welfare. And if you don't work, you don't eat. That's not at all what that text is about. At the time of writing this letter, there were people who believed that the end of the world was going to come, so why bother? Why have a career? Let's just wait for it all to end. And that's what Paul was writing about. And he's saying, no, you should get on with your lives. Some people said, there's no point in getting married or having children because it's all going to end. Why bother? And so the encouragement today from Paul is to just get on with your lives. You just have to do what you need to do and not be idle, not just wait for the end to come. So I want to talk a little bit about the gospel, because there may be 5 occasions in the Synoptic Gospels where Jesus is directly engaging apocalyptic imagery, and this is one of them. And you can tell which category he's referring to, because when this was written, the temple was already destroyed. But for Luke, the author of the Acts of the Apostles, as well as the Gospel of Luke, the temple is a very important backdrop to a story that is going on. And it's interesting that in its time, it took 46 years to build this temple. It cost enormous amounts of money. It was something like 15 stories high. It was absolutely beautiful and adorned with gold plate. And there are stories from the historian Josephus. He tells us that being covered on all sides with massive plates of gold, the sun was no sooner up than it radiated so fiery a flash that persons straining to look at it were compelled to avert their eyes as from the solar rays. And its furnishings are as lavish as the building itself. So you can imagine these, itinerant preacher country bumpkins coming to Jerusalem and seeing this amazing building. And it represented stability. It represented the presence of God with Israel. And for Jesus to then say, okay, people, this is all going to go, was an audacious thing to say. And yet we know that the temple will be destroyed. We know from the book of Acts that people will be brought before synagogues and kings. Paul is brought before King Agrippa. Stephen is martyred. And all of that has already happened, and that there is persecution in the church when this story is written. So the apocalyptic stuff that Jesus is talking about is revising the past. It's already happened, but they're trying to make sense of it for a church that is struggling to figure out who it is and where it needs to go. And so there are signs, there are natural disasters, there are signs and portents in heaven and so on. The other important thing to remember about Jesus and apocalyptic teachings, he doesn't buy it all. Jesus filters. He's very much a first century Jew. And certainly he would have maybe believed that in his own time, part of this, dramatic cosmic change was going to happen. But he didn't buy into the popular belief that the end was going to come when a Messiah warrior prince, the Messiah, the son of David, was going to come with an army and overthrow Rome. That was a very popular belief that even his disciples believed. And he had difficulty going in again to the book of Isaiah, and he opened the section where it talks about that the Messiah is going to be the suffering servant. That it's not through holy violence that God's revelation is going to be made known. It's through God's justice and love that God's revelation in him. So the whole idea that Jesus was filtering apocalyptic ideas of his time, and he wasn't buying into all of it. And I think that's very important for us today. So I reflect upon this. It was interesting when I looked at the readings this week following the election. And I know that there are people in the country who think that we're about to have an apocalypse. And it's really important that people of faith ground themselves into what apocalypse really means. I don't believe this election is about the apocalypse in a popular sense, but maybe it is about an apocalypse in the sense of seeing something that a week ago we did not see. Right? It is a kind of revelation. You know, I've lived in the United States most of my life now, and I've lived either in California most of that time or in now the Northeast. And this vote, the pattern of this voting was a revelation to me how out of touch I am with people in this country. And what is that about? You know, we talk about the flyover part of the USA. And what is going on for people that this decision has been made? And so it is a kind of a wake-up call. And it was pretty amazing that in one election and through the work of one candidate, two very powerful political dynasties, the Bushes and the Clintons, were bypassed. That politically, these two families have dominated the political landscape of this country for a long time. And so that's a kind of radical revelation that is challenging and is disturbing. And for many people, it has shaken us to our core. Between services today, I reflected on Martin Luther. Tori and I had a little class looking at the Reformation and the role that Martin Luther had 500 years ago. Next year will be the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. I heard a woman called Phyllis Tickle. She's got a great name, Phyllis Tickle. She's a futurist. She's a religious. She kind of predicts where religion and culture is going, particularly in the United States. And she talked about this 500-year-old process of where we take the rope of everything we know, of culture and civilization, all that we value, and we unravel the rope. And we look at all the strands of the rope. And it can be religion, theology, culture, politics, gender, sexuality. And we say, is this helpful? Is this something that we need, or how do we reform it to move forward? And then we put the rope back together again, and it keeps us going for about another 500 years. And it was very fascinating looking at how radical here Martin Luther, this little crazy monk in Germany, took on the Pope and the princes of Germany. And he had social media on his side through printing. And his theology and his ideas and his politics got out in a way that they couldn't have before. And so, in many ways, the era we're now living in, Phyllis Tickle would agree, is part of this great upheaval of unraveling the rope to figure out how we move forward. And I say that in a way to kind of give us stability. The end of the gospel, Jesus talks about all these things that have already happened. People who are reading Luke's gospel, they know this story. But he tells them to just stick to their work. Put one foot in front of the other. And I think that's a very important message for not only for the church today, but for the country today. It's really important that we do all we can to support the decisions and the changes that we are a part of. I grew up in a country, in Ireland, where we could not share power peacefully 4,000 people were killed because we didn't know how to share power or transfer power between differing communities. And you look at Syria, you look at Turkey, you look at many countries around the world today, in Africa, where the idea of the peaceful transfer of power and administration goes on, and how lucky we are to be able to do that in this country. And we may disagree politically, but we really are in this together. And the apocalypse for me this week is about how out of touch I am with a lot of people in this country. And I don't know what's going on. And a lot of us are waking up to that reality. And what do we do about it? About a month ago, I heard David Brooks. I preached about it. I talked about it a few weeks ago. David Brooks was talking about the election and kind of where we go from here. And my question to him was, what's the media going to talk about after the election? And his answer surprised me. He said, intimacy. He said that our institutions in this country, that more and more we are isolated, we are living in our own little silos, in our own bubbles, we already have our walls. And the challenge of our institutions is to start to break those down and to start connecting with people that are not like us and that we don't know. And I thought that was a very powerful challenge. And just as I would say the model of Jesus is he filters, he is not responding totally or buying into the popular idea of what it means to be the Messiah. So in Jesus, there is an example of somebody who is filtering apocalyptic messages. And for him, the incarnation of God in each one of us was the new revelation, that God becomes flesh and blood in him and in you and in I. And as we journey in the next couple of weeks towards Christmas, and we have that wonderful Advent season and wonderful music and that kind of expecting, I hope that writing ourselves about what apocalyptic imagery in scriptures is all about, and that it can help us as we journey and make sense of what we see before us. Amen.